Hello, welcome to my YouTube, and we're going over myths of common beliefs in the diet space. And so the biggest myth that I encounter is carbs are bad for you. And there is just so much hoopla. I was with a surgeon last night, and he was saying how sometimes his patients even argue with him over surgical interventions, and it can be really frustrating when you have science versus opinion. And a lot of times, science loses. A lot of times in arguments, people don't want to look at the science, or they don't believe the science, or they feel injured from someone that has provided them with scientific information. And so sometimes it gets into proving each other wrong. And so what if the three nutrients that are found in food, that's what we know to date, is carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And we have a lot of information on how bodies work on carbohydrates. We have a lot of information on how bodies work on proteins and fats, and it can be overwhelming. It can be stressful. It can cause discomfort in certain areas. And carbohydrates are neither good nor bad. It's how you think about them that makes them so. And that was actually a quote from Shakespeare in Hamlet. And carbohydrates actually fuel the brain and the nervous system, and they're vital, and you do need them. And glucose can be an alternative fuel if you're using different fuel, such as ketones in the brain. That does slow the brain functioning down, which slows it down, which can be good for certain disease states. It can be good for people who process really, really fast and they want to slow things down. That also can feel very stifling for some people. They don't want to have a slower brain, or that feels really uncomfortable. And so people tend to describe what they feel like when it comes to food versus the science of it. And then they argue the science because that's not feelings. And so there's lots of conversations that are happening. In a scientific arena, carbohydrates carry about 4 units of energy, or 4 calories per gram. And a serving of carbohydrates is about 15 grams. And that is kind of like learning the ABCs. And in some languages, the ABCs are different. It's alpha, beta, che. So it's much different than, it's a different conversation when you're in different arenas. And so in my arena in science, 4 calories per gram, 15 carbohydrates is a serving, where some diet plans require 0 carbohydrates, some require 300 grams. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad if it's 0 or if it's bad if it's 300. They just have different outcomes. And so 300 grams of carbohydrates would require quite a bit of activity. And if the body is not active, you don't really need as much. And so you can be in a state of ketosis where you're using ketones as fuel. And some people feel like that can fuel them longer. Well, it can. Fat, the nutrient fat or lipids, have a much higher density per gram, 9 units of energy per gram. And so you can do a lot more activity. You do need a lot more oxygen to have lipolysis. And so glucose is an easier mechanism to find fuel. You also produce a lot of water. And so a lot of times people say they feel more bloated when they have carbohydrates. Well, that's because of glycolysis. You actually have water as a byproduct. And so, again, the science is different than the feeling, but sometimes they can be aligned, and sometimes they can be so misaligned where you have a lot of cognitive dissonance of what you believe is different than what you do. And a lot of times in low carb spaces, carbohydrates are feared. And then that fear can create anxiety. The anxiety can feel stressful. So when you remove the stress, you remove the fear, that feels better. I just feel better when I don't have carbs. Great. We want you to feel better. And sometimes changing the body does require a scientific examination of what's happening. And sometimes that's a hard conversation too, because it feels unsafe. And safety is required for change, for true change, at least true transformation. What would be helpful is to use the language of carbs aren't necessarily bad. Are they aligned with your goals? Are they something that you want to add into your diet to help you heal? My professional opinion as a doctor of preventive medicine is they do. They help calm your nervous system in a very nourishing way. And soda is different than a sweet potato. So then that's a different conversation of, well, what is the type of carbohydrate? There are 6 types of carbohydrate that are simple, and then you have many, many combinations of polysaccharides. So saccharides would be the formal definition of sugar. There's 6 simple, and then you get into polysaccharides where there's many, and you're gonna find that in foods like grains or starchy potatoes. They all have different things attached to them, things being vitamins, minerals, and water. Also different fibers, different fats, different proteins. So you absorb them differently. And then depending upon the metabolism, depending upon the digestion, depending upon the disease states will dictate which are going to be helpful. Also depending upon enzymes that break down food like amylase or lactase, that's going to help break down different carbohydrates. So there's so many factors that go into carbohydrates. It is impossible to give a one blanket statement, and it is a myth that they are bad for you. Hope this helps. If this is valuable, follow along. Okay, bye.